Hello, welcome, and namaste. Welcome, Nate, to Career Journey Podcast. Thank you so much for accepting the invite. I have been doing this for some time, and bringing your story would be amazing for all the audience. So, with that, I want to hand over mic to you to share about what you're doing right now and what's your typical day and week look like.
Sure. Yeah, so right now I'm independent. I actually had a full-time position as a lead architect at my last organization, and I'll speak a bit to that role as well, because I think that was really interesting and a very dynamic role, and a little more typical than my last 6 months. So the last 6 months, I've been working independently, doing some consulting work, doing development, working with different companies and leaders, and was building a business plan to do really coaching and mentorship was a lot of what I was doing. And so, coaching, working with startup founders and early stage companies. In particular, I like working with kind of founding engineers, founding CTOs. I think it's a really exciting, dynamic part of a journey when you have somebody who's been grinding code and very deep in the technology. And then when you're starting a company, there's so many other aspects to figure out. You got to learn about business, how to build a team, how to talk to investors. And so I've always enjoyed speaking with founders. Early in my career, I was a founding engineer. And so I had a lot of experience there. And a lot of my career, I've reported to and worked with CEOs and CTOs directly. And so I've always served in the more middle ground role. I've always been a bit of a translation layer between technical and higher level business objectives and really enjoyed that time. On the other side, I've been doing a lot of mentorship. And so this is specifically working with earlier career developers as well as career transitioners. It's something my whole career I've been working in tech and specifically web development for almost 20 years. And I've always felt like tech is a very big space with room for everyone. And I love the stories of people who don't necessarily have a computer science degree, don't necessarily have a background or a huge story of passion and excitement for programming, but they can get into tech. And so I've worked with a lot of individuals who are older, who have arguably are in the middle of their careers, but they're moving into programming. And everybody from people in the defense industry to musicians to people in the film industry, it's been really encouraging to see how much people are able to move into tech to learn new skills and to find a career they're really excited about. Building stuff, I think, is something that's so compelling about tech. And it's been really cool. So the last few months, my day to day has been widely variable. The fun parts are definitely having a lot of calls and having a lot of meetings with individuals. I have mentees where we have consistent cadences. So we usually do one on ones every other week or at least once a month and get to join in a part of their journey, help be just a small portion of that and give some advice on the experiences that I've had as well. So the last 6 months have been that. And the side thing that I've been building up is doing more content creation. And so I've always liked the educational side of things. Most of my jobs, I've presented, whether it's training seminars or deep dives on specific technology. I've always really enjoyed teaching others difficult concepts in technology. And so I've got a very fledgling YouTube channel where I started documenting a little bit of the journey. And I've been live streaming on Twitch a lot. And I think Twitch and live streaming has been one of the coolest things in the past 6 months. It's been really awesome to see. It's challenging, it's difficult to code live and to go live and feel very vulnerable. But the community has been so awesome. And it's cool to have people who show up stream after stream and keep coming back. And I've also had a lot of success just using that as a way to focus on certain side projects as well. I'll chunk out a certain amount of time to do a stream, and I have an objective for I'm going to work on this side project during that. And I've been learning a lot of new tech. I've been digging in with things like Bun, new JavaScript package manager and runtime, and playing with new frameworks and experimental technology. So that's been really fun. And that is now I'm coming to a season where I'm actually looking for my next full-time role. So I've gone back into sort of the interview pipeline and process. And that's been challenging in its own way, but also really exciting. I think there's a lot of cool companies out there, and it's been really fun getting back into that pipeline while also very challenging with the technicals. Interview skills is something that you always need to hone, you always need to sharpen and be prepared. And so I've been doing a lot of reading, research, and just practicing coding, which has been really cool. At my last role, so I served as the lead architect at a company called Lightbox, and that was a fascinating journey. It was such a cool company because it was about 4 or 5 years old when I joined. This was a company that was built by acquisition. So they were backed by private equity, Silver Lake and Battery Ventures, the main funders there, and they sell commercial real estate and location data and services. And so if you've used Uber, Apple Maps, Google Maps, any of these applications, you've touched data that Lightbox owns. And so it was really cool, not necessarily a household name in like consumer applications, but very impactful leader because they basically came onto the scene and acquired a bunch of industry leaders. So when I started working at the company, they were at 7 acquisitions, I believe, and when I left, they were around 10. And as lead architect, I reported to the CTO, and I got the opportunity to work with a lot of different teams. So it was so cool because you have a bunch of different technologies, stacks, processes, and engineering cultures. A lot of people have different SDLCs and different ways they approach them. And Lightbox's perspective was really cool because they largely let teams self-organize. So if a team had their certain sprint cadence and meetings they really liked, Lightbox wouldn't really mess with that upon acquisition, but more look for the critical connection points where you really want all of technology to be aligned. So when it came to things like the release process and like supporting things, connecting with infrastructure, a lot of that, we had the goal of unifying and bringing people together. Whereas a lot of the day to day, it wasn't too heavy handed. They had teams that liked organizing in different ways, and that was totally fine. As the lead architect, I had a team that I managed, and we built a unified API surface. So we built Lightbox API, which provided API access to a lot of data products. Where in the old days of data products, you'd have a lot of fulfillment and a lot of manual processes, and there were often data that would be packaged and delivered. And this was modernizing a lot of those businesses and making this one-stop API where you could come and it was all metered and monetized through a portal. And so my team worked on that, as well as the developer portal that kind of went hand in hand with the API that had all of the documentation and the dashboard to log in. And my third project for my team was building a design framework. And so using Chakra and React, we were building our own design framework on top of that. So all these teams across the company were able to build applications and build into our next generation platform with consistent visual language, with consistent components, and a nice look and feel. And so it was really cool to approach some very large, challenging projects as a team manager, where I was directly responsible for those. But then the other side of my role was just going around to a bunch of different engineering teams. And so there were different problems, different challenges. One team working on some backend services was using Express and building some APIs with Node. And they didn't have a big framework or a big approach for how to do that. So working with those engineers to figure out what's the best way to structure this, what technology do we want to leverage, and then working with other teams on just helping with the challenges they faced. So that week to week was a lot of meetings and a lot of variability, but I also got to build tech all the time. And I think that's something I've valued. I've been in a couple different, what you could call management positions at this point, but always as a player coach. I've always stayed close to the technology. I'm doing code reviews for people on my team as well as other teams, and I get to jump into the code and debug and build some features. And I think that's been a cool role of the niche of tech management that I've been in, is I've always been close to the tech. I've always found time, even for just higher level decisions on technology direction or frameworks or tools or other parts of an ecosystem that we're trying to use, being able to do prototypes, evaluating different options. I'm always trying to build things. And that was such a cool part of that job, was the availability to build stuff consistently, even if a lot of my time was management, coaching, mentoring, working with other teams, and finding that alignment across the business.
There was so much information in this one. You talk about founder, CTO, CEO working with them, and it obviously it require a special skill, your executive presence to be able to communicate, talk, and act normal, right? So it's a skill, and you definitely possess that. Kudos on that. And then you was talking about the early career and transitioner, and those are the two big segment where I also try to help. And I know from my experience that when most of the people are shooting for getting somehow get the first job, but the journey actually begins when you are in that first job and you spend a month or 6 months, then how you drive your career to wherever you are trying to drive, right? So that's a key part for anybody to get a job and then where they want to take it from too. So that's definitely a big moment. And then second, once you spend 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you feel stuck unless you are thinking strategically in which direction you want to go. You don't have to stay developer always. You could slide into a product manager role. You could slide into a manager role or architecture role, but that has to be your intentional decision. And that has to come from within based on all the signal that you have seen in last 3 years. So I want to kind of spend a few minutes on that. What's your take on that when you have a mentee, either in the early career or somebody who is looking for a transition? What kind of thing that you suggest or you look in them?
Man, so you hit on some really significant things there because I think one of the most important bits of perspective, and I needed to learn this myself, a career is a long thing. I think I read an article recently where it's your average career, you're looking at about 40 years. And I think it's very easy to hyper focus on the current stage that we're at to really look at the immediate term. And oftentimes you need to, right? Especially if you're looking for that job, you're trying to pay your bills. The next role is critically important, but it's also not going to be your last role. And it's not going to define you either. And I think this is something that early in my career, in my first couple jobs, I had this mentality that I was on a racetrack and I had to get the best next position possible because that would dictate the rest of my career. I had this feeling in my mind, maybe it was just a gut feeling, but I had this assumption that the next role will define some huge part of the rest of my career. And it's really not true. I think that there's so much learning and growth that happens, especially early on. The most important thing is getting that first role. And that can be very challenging in and of itself. But I've seen a lot of people, especially new graduates from college, where they're looking for the job they're passionate about. And especially in my generation, I feel like it was a common thing of don't want to just get a job, I want to get a passion. And there's a book that I read that's incredibly smart. Cal Newport, who's an author, he has a PhD in computer science. He went to MIT, very brilliant guy. But he has a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And the subline is why skills trump passion in finding the best career for your life, or something like that, or finding a career that you love. And he argues against this passion hypothesis, the idea that if you work a job you love, or if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's what he calls the passion hypothesis. And he debunks it by going through a bunch of the most incredible, fulfilling, and high level careers that people built, and then looking at what did they do early in their career. And almost all of them started at jobs they weren't passionate about, they weren't excited about. They were doing the grind for a company that was making some product or doing even news stuff and articles. There are people that started in like journalism, then went into computer science. And he noted how the significant thing is as people develop and build the skills, they discover their passion. And then almost none of these individuals started their career with this idea of, I'm going to do this thing because it's what I like the most. They went and got a job They worked to pay their bills and to build their skills, but over the course of building their skills over years and years, they worked their way into the most fulfilling career. And so that's something that I emphasize with people is don't set your expectations too high and don't get too picky, because the reality is when you start, whether you're a career transitioner or you're fresh out of college, ironically, having a computer science degree, I think, gives a lot of false confidence when the reality is when you walk into that first workplace, you're not using a lot of what you learned in your classes. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but the day to day looks very different. And there are so many areas of working for a company that you learn and pick up along the way, whether it's their specific software development lifecycle, how they handle code versioning and pull requests and all of that, or whether it's just working with a manager, working with a team, describing your problems well, getting requirements from product people. There's so much that's in there. And you realistically can't expect a school or a boot camp or a program to teach you all of that. So I think that the value is going in and understanding how much you have to learn, especially early on, where you can't waste a year, really. If you spend a year anywhere, no matter how little you like that company, you're going to build so many skills. You're going to build so much understanding and awareness, and you might find something you absolutely fall in love with. But I like Cal's mentality that you develop the skills, you develop the craftsman mindset, and ultimately you're going to discover passion through that. That it's more about being incredibly competent and building that competence over time that leads to that really fulfilling and exciting career. And so I try to preach that a lot with people, especially when they're looking at the first couple of jobs. It's focus on yourself, what you're learning, how you're growing, and you can do most of those things anywhere. The reality is there's so many jobs that will work great for you because what you need to do is do more work, learn more about yourself, learn more about the field. And as you do that, you're going to grow in ways that are totally unique to you as a person, not necessarily specific to any one company. So I try to take that pressure off, especially when people, and I feel like this is more common with university graduates, where they feel a lot of competition around, am I going to get at a FANG company or big tech or this? It's honestly like that doesn't matter because you have people who dropped out and found amazing careers, and you have people who went to Google and found amazing careers. Everybody's path is unique, but there's not much that will limit you or restrict you, in my opinion. As long as you go in identifying your top goal as how can I build and learn the most? How can I grow as an individual? I think that's the right focus to have.
100%. My father always says this one thing that instead of waiting at home for the best job, you take the job that is available and then keep looking. So that would be a better approach than sitting at home and trying to decline everything unless you get your dream job. So my father always say that, and that's what I followed after my engineering. When I couldn't find an engineering job, I I started a marketing job which was available, and I did that for 10 months, and then that allowed me to be in the market, that allowed me to interact with so many people, and that helped me identify the computer is the best thing to do. So instead of going after the manufacturing and engineering companies, I did a computer course and went into programming. Directly, indirectly, it helped. And the other thing that I always believe and talk about is this. I don't know if you have played the dot game where you connect all the dot and end of that practice or game, you see a picture because you
Mm,
connected all the dots. In life, we do that all the time. We work on the left side of the picture or the right side of the picture or top or bottom. And at time, it feel like the time that we spend building that left side top is wasted. Like that time has been wasted because now I'm in completely different direction. I'm on the right side doing something, right? For example, in my case, I did marketing for 10 months and then programming. And then there was a time when I was a business analyst for a contract. But when you see the bigger picture, they all had important lessons and important thing that made me who I am today. And that also gave me
Absolutely.
opportunity to listen to all the signals that I had. And now I know that my biggest thing is to help team reach finish line. That's what make me excited most of the time. If you give me a timeline and then other people or directors, VPs or team members saying we cannot hit this, that gave me so much excitement. Let's do it. We will. If it is important, for sure. Great discussion. Great discussion. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I want to touch on uh, Lightbox company. So, couple of questions there. How long it was there?
About 3 years.
Okay. And then when you joined, you were working for them as an architect, lead architect. But when you joined, what was your role?
I joined as lead architect. I
Okay.
was initially reporting to a VP of engineering. So initially, I worked with a VP on the application platform, and then ultimately transitioned where I was reporting to the CTO. So my title didn't change, but the role changed, and
Mhm.
especially the breadth of things I spanned. At that point, I started working with a lot more teams in engineering and working on a lot more projects. And that was cool to get that broader exposure, to get experience with more technologies, and just learned a lot and worked with a lot of amazing people in my time there.
Awesome. And then, if you don't mind, may I ask, why did you leave that company?
So leaving was to pursue a bit of a passion project of my
Okay.
own. It was setting out on doing some content creation and kind of looking at what that would look like to build more educational resources and stuff. Ultimately, I didn't make as much progress on that stuff in the last 6 months as I would have liked. And in many ways, it turned into a sabbatical too. We had some health issues in our family.
Well,
And so that was the major thing was, especially in the US, healthcare being wrapped up in employment is not the best system. Losing my health care from my employer and then immediately having some serious health issues was difficult. But there was a few months there where I was really just there for my family and focused on my family and myself. But yeah, it was leaving Lightbox was not for a new company or opportunity that was there, and it wasn't out of total hatred for Lightbox or anything like that. It was a really good relationship, and even after I left Lightbox, I stopped working full time, but I still did some contract work for them. So I
mhm.
could through pretty much the rest of the year, helping out with certain projects. And even that was cool to stay connected to some of those individuals and teams and be able to see those projects across the finish line. But yeah, it was leaving Lightbox was all right, I'm going to try this independent thing and see how it goes and try to build up a bit of a client base. And then just recently, last few weeks ago, restarted my full time job search. And that was two pieces. One, when I was planning to leave Lightbox, I set those plans way ahead of time, right? So I was actively working to manage myself out of that role. One of the architects who reported to me became a manager and he took
Mhm.
parts. And then some of my engineers and architects actually went to other teams where they filled a really good role. They were mostly servicing a different team anyways, like the architect that was primary on the front end design framework. There was a React team that was really strong in building a lot of those apps, and it made sense for him to go there. I managed myself out of that position well, and all of the seeds I'd been planting over 3 years as a manager really blossomed, and seeing those teams and individuals come up was an amazingly fulfilling part of that job. But it also meant there wasn't as much of a space for me anymore. And
Mm.
I still meet with the CTO. I'm good friends with him. We had lunch just about a month ago. And it's funny talking to him where it's like a lot of the needs that I was filling 2 years ago, a year ago, those needs aren't there anymore. And that's fantastic for that company. But I think it was that paired with a desire for new experiences, looking around at the industry and wanting to get a fresh experience that ultimately led me to not just go back to Lightbox, but still have amazing relationships with all the people that I worked with there. So yeah, it wasn't anything major, any huge motivator. It was I'm gonna take a chance and try this independent thing and see how it goes.
So, how long were you thinking about doing this? Was it a thought that run for a couple of weeks, or were you thinking about it for months?
Oh, it's been years. Frankly, there were different forms of the idea and kind of the passion behind it. Ultimately, creating content is something that impacted my life really well. So during the pandemic and my job at Lightbox, I had to move around and learn so much tech. I was constantly learning new things. And I found out partway through what blew my mind a little bit was some of the best resources for learning things, especially with some of the React and like the front end ecosystem. Some of the best resources were YouTube videos. You have these YouTubers who are creating educational content, and they're not introductory level engineers. These are senior engineers. People like Jack Harrington. He's got a channel called Blue Collar Coder, and he would break down architectural patterns. He would break down new framework features in this really detailed but concise way where I could watch a 10 to 20-minute YouTube video and understand and get all of the training that might have taken me an hour of reading docs to get that information. And that was something that was so helpful in my career. I thought that was so cool. I was like, this is great that there's people out there who are passionate and knowledgeable and put this information out into the world because it's so accessible. And I always loved that side of it. But during the pandemic, especially in the United States, there was just a lot of difficulty with social situations and going outside and all the crazy stuff that we went through. But there was a lot of social connection as well, whether it was on Twitter, YouTube channels, Discords, a lot of Discord communities. I found multiple avenues for connecting with developers and talking with other engineers that was just personally encouraging. Getting onto a Twitter space and talking with people like you and hearing about these problems get some of that social scratch that I was looking for, especially during the pandemic. So on both sides, there was an informational gap that I think is filled very well by content creators these days, and also a community aspect that was encouraging as well as, again, giving more opportunity for social interaction in times where it was difficult in the country. And so that was the start of it that inspired me, just seeing, wow, it's so cool how much value and how much encouragement I've gotten because there are people out there who just go on Twitter and start a Twitter space and bring in a bunch of people and have these amazing conversations, or push the record button on a camera and take YouTube videos. And if I could do that in a similar way, that would be so rewarding and that would be so cool. So that was the beginning of that inspiration. And yeah, it was like years ago. And there was a lot of time where I was slowly learning video editing and slowly building skills and learning different bits of tech and never produced as much as I would have liked. Even today, I'd like to put out more YouTube videos. And there's a lot of fear and things that kind of hold me back from that. Even though I know better in my mind, I'm not going to make a perfect video. I'm not going to be the best voice on anything, but the practice of just creating stuff and putting yourself out there has been really fulfilling. But yeah, so it was a long time that I was planning it. And I think part of that too, I've got a wife and two beautiful kids, and your whole perspective on risk changes a lot when you have family dependent on you. So even that, the year leading up to leaving Lightbox, that was a big part of it, was just thinking through things. We saved a lot of money, so we would have a runway where I didn't need to bring in money immediately. I didn't need to like instantly get contracts and everything to pay the bills. And that all went into it, but it was a very long-term perspective. And again, even the teams at Lightbox, I didn't want to fall off the face of the earth and leave people in a lurch. So there was a lot of planning that went in, even in how I was mentoring some people on my team, knowing that I would want them in the future to step up and take some of these either additional responsibilities, management roles, or moving to other teams. I just wanted to leave everybody in the best place they could be. So it was a very planned and long-term perspective, and I think that was super helpful with the transition as well.
Thank you for sharing that. One last follow-up question on this one is when you left the job and then started doing your own things, obviously when you're working, projects are given by them, by the company, you have big problem to solve, you have a structure, and then you come into your own content creation, your consultation and everything, and you have to do everything by your own. You have to create your own schedule, you have to bring your own discipline as well. So how did you handle all that?
Yeah, so this gets into kind of that goal setting and time management conversation. And it's incredibly important because there was something I heard early on in life where it's like, whenever somebody says, I don't have time for something, that's technically a lie. What they're really saying is, this thing is not a priority. It's not enough of a priority to warrant my time, which is totally fine. There's nothing against that. We all have a set of priorities, but you really have to think in those terms because if you make something a high enough priority, you're going to find time for that. And I think it's especially in today's age, there's so much to fill our time, to fill our plates with. There's so much busyness, even just like staying up to date in technology or in world events. Like there's so much news and media and things that can vie for our attention. And for me, it's been about intentional identification of your priorities. So it's really sitting down and intentionally thinking through what are my priorities and is my time spent aligning with that? I think that I was in college, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so it's something that's also makes it even more important is focus does not come naturally to me. And it's not always easy to stay on the same task or the same track of thinking. And so goal setting and identifying priorities and identifying values, I think, are very critical for this. So, one, sitting down and being honest about, okay, what are the most critical things for me to work on? And let me make sure I've got my priorities straight. And a chunk of that is going to be non work stuff. There's family in there, making sure that I have time to spend with my son every day and that I'm not neglecting that time, making sure that I make time for my wife and that we connect and we make date nights together and do fun things. There's so much that you have to balance. And by sitting down and thinking through the priorities, I think it's most helpful to see what's being underserved. And especially early on, that was easy. There was so much to focus on, there were so many different things to do. It was easy for me to let something naturally fall, not to the bottom of the list, but below the point in your list where it gets attention, right? Because that's the thing is we have our set of priorities. It's always pretty much always going to be more than we have time to commit to every week. And so there's somewhere in the list that'll get a cutoff where unless something's really light or you have extra time on a week, like you're not going to make it all the way down this huge list of things you could be doing every single week. And so you want to be aware of what are the things that I am consistently putting time in because they're my top three priorities. I'm going to do that. I'm going to show up to my meetings. I'm going to talk with clients. I'm going to do the work on the projects that I need. But then you get further down the list and you have to think, okay, if this thing is a priority long term, but it's been far enough down the list that I haven't spent an hour on it in the last 2 weeks, okay, what do I need to change to make sure I'm at least investing some time in that consistently? And reviewing my priorities, I think, helped a lot with that. And then focus on a day-to-day thing is very difficult with ADHD. And I think I've learned a lot of little tactics and techniques, but a lot of it is fairly straightforward stuff that you hear about a lot. So setting timers for things, time blocking my schedule. I learned a lot about time blocking the last 3 years. And I think that was actually another Cal Newport book. I've actually got it right here. There's a journal, the Time Block Planner, and I'm pretty sure this is also put out by Cal Newport. Yeah, because it's a daily method for deep work in a distracted world. So Cal Newport also wrote a book called Deep Work that's very influential. And the thing with time blocking is that it's not rigid schedules. There are times where I sit down and I time block my whole day and I hold to nothing on there. It totally changes and it's very flexible. I think that's what made it easier for me to approach is understanding. I set a plan, I put in a structure, but it's all a loose blueprint and I'm not going to hold my toes to the fire for things to go exactly minute by minute how I planned. But even that general awareness where I can sketch out my day and get a feeling and then go, okay, here's where I have an hour block. Here's my priority list and that thing I haven't gotten to. Okay, let me put that in there and have an hour where I really focus on this thing that I might otherwise not find the time to focus on. So I think time blocking as well as time tracking, which I've done in the past using apps like Rescue Time or Toggle, that reflection can be very helpful. So it's not just the time blocking of planning how you're going to use your time, which I do not always hold to be clear. I make plans and I frequently break them, or I end up taking that hour and just relaxing with that time or going and watching some TV with my wife. And that's fine. I think having that grace for yourself is critical, but developing more and more of an awareness of where your time goes in the day was the biggest thing for me personally. And that came through periods of time tracking, mainly when I would review it. So I would track all of my time, and some jobs had it. Sometimes this was for a job, sometimes it was just personal. But you have to go and look back too. There's some moment of reflection, and that's when I think we understand better where our time goes. And then the planning process as well, where you sit down, you plan around your day, because that's where you'll sometimes discover really awesome pockets of time that you can utilize more if you want to put more time into something, or you're trying to work on a side project or whatever that may be. When you have that priority that you're trying to push up to the point where you're like, I will spend a couple hours on this thing over the next month. When you do the preparation and planning for your day to set out and map out your time blocks, even if it's loose and your things come up, you have different random meetings during the day, whatever it is, you don't need to hold exactly to it, but the practice of planning it is going to help you to discover and learn more about how time really works in your role and in your position and in your life.
I use this for my timer.
Ooh, I
So
love that.
I
So you
just
just got it
change,
quick.
yeah, it just, you change it like this, and then there's your 15-minute timer.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've got a very boring analog version, but I've got an analog timer
Okay,
here. And so
nice.
you just twist around, you'll get a little time slot. And this is something that I've used personally. So this is helpful, even when I'm streaming. So I've streamed before and I've done co working streams where I'm not even showing my screen.
Uh-huh.
I'm just streaming and I'm like, I have to work through a couple tasks. And so I have the camera off to the side where you can see my desk, and I'll use this timer to say, okay, this is when I'm going to take a break and talk to chat and hang out. And so the whole stream can see this visual indicator, and then it goes off and I'm like, okay, cool. I get my break now and I get to hang out with chat and talk about projects or answer questions or whatever it is. But yeah, I think timers are an incredibly valuable tool just to make sure you're when you find the time, when you
Mhm.
have the time you want to dedicate to something, holding yourself to that. And it's not about tracking every minute for an employer or being super detailed about exactly, it's not about a very strict schedule. It's more about the personal empowerment that you get from an awareness of your time. And when you prioritize a time block and you use a timer to say, okay, this is the only thing I'm going to focus on, it feels essential for me oftentimes, the ADHD, where I'm like, I don't even know if I will try to look at something on my phone or try to get distracted by something else going on every 5 or 10 minutes if it weren't for this. But having a visual timer in front of you and knowing,
Right.
no, I've promised myself the next 15 minutes are going to be just this one thing. It can really help you bring yourself back and escape from the distractions and break out of that loop of things trying to vie for your attention.
I want to get into streaming. I have not tried that yet, but I've been thinking about it. What software are you using?
So I'm using OBS, so it's
Okay. So
Open
with that,
Broadcasting
you can
System.
stream to one application at a time, right?
Yep. So Open Broadcaster software, and there's a plugin that allows you to multiplex the signal. So you can multi-stream. I think it's called Multi RTMP is a plugin. And so you can send a stream to multiple sources. So you could stream to Twitch and YouTube
Okay.
or Twitter or whatever, but it uses more bandwidth from your computer. So it's basically you're limited by your network at some level of how many bits you can push over the wire. There are services as well like Restream.io, and they do the same thing, but on the server side, where you stream to one destination
Mm.
and then they multi stream the signal from there. And there's some other features
Right.
and things built into services like that. But yeah, so you can stream to multiple platforms, but by default, OBS just does one platform. You put in your URL and your key for a specific platform to go there.
Okay. And a couple of rapid fire question. What's the plan for content in next 6 months or 2 years? Where Nate want to reach?
So my biggest goal with content is to get to 50 YouTube videos. And that's frankly just I need to put in the reps and I need to make more videos. It's the ultimate streaming is very fun, but I think YouTube video content is where my goal really is because It's more digestible, it's more lasting. A lot of like Twitter and YouTube and or not, sorry, Twitter, Twitch, even like TikTok and Instagram and these short
Uh-huh.
form platforms, the content is more ephemeral. So you put out a tweet, that tweet's out of the life cycle in a day or two. You put out a short video, it's probably off of feeds within a week. Whereas
Yeah.
good YouTube videos are around for a while and they're a great resource and I think they're really helpful. So my goal is to build up conceptually and have a little bit of a roadmap to touch on different topics that I'm really passionate about and or that I've just learned a lot about. I don't think I'm the best expert on anything, and that's part of the confidence I've had to wrestle with. But main goal is just 50 videos because I need to put in a lot of time and effort if I'm going to get good at it. So I'm setting my goal at output and not quality. And
Yep.
it's
Perfect.
hard for me as a perfectionist, but that's where I'd like to get. Just keep doing it.
That's perfect. And when I started my YouTube channel, I'm not sure if I can face my camera all the time. So I came up with this idea of doing a podcast where I let other person do the most of the talking, but I'm still,
It's a great
yeah,
Yeah, it's a great strategy. The fear of recording is huge. And I
yeah,
think I've given presentations in person. I've given presentations on Zoom to many participants, but there's something about pushing the record button on something that you're going to edit and you're going to put up on the internet and it's going to be there forever. It's scary and it's difficult. And I definitely, yeah, I don't want to undersell that, but I love your approach. That's such a good strategy is doing a podcast. It's a conversation. It's easier to forget the fact that there's something
yeah,
recording and you get to engage with a human, which I think is much easier. Just sitting alone and talking to yourself can be like the scariest part of recording sometimes is it feels awkward even just to sit there and talk to a camera or like with streaming you're still there's people there's interaction it feels there's more to distract you from the fact that there's a camera on your face.
right, right. And my situation was completely different that I get so much nervous if I'm presenting, even to my team, or if this is a bigger meeting, I just my hands, all everything is so nervous. But now, just last week, I presented to a big audience. They are all senior executive, and it was an amazing presentation. And thanks
Nice.
to all the rep that I have in the spaces and YouTube videos and everything else, I am feeling more and more comfortable now. So,
That's awesome. And that's such a big point too. I gave a talk at that conference on cultivating confidence because I think confidence is such a
right.
critically important thing.
I saw
And
that,
it's
by the way.
not
I saw the recording.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but I love the idea that you can develop it in little ways, in little practices, but it's all about the reps. It's all about getting in practice and getting reps. And I love Twitter Spaces for that. So that was like when I first got into Twitter Spaces, and one of my favorite ones. I haven't been to it for a long time, but I think it's Tim Brown has a confident
Mhm.
speaking space. And that space, he says this is a stage for anybody to join, and you can come up and just get some practice talking. And I think public speaking is one of the biggest fears. There are surveys where public speaking outranks death as a fear, where people are literally more afraid of getting on a stage in front of a bunch of people than they are thinking about dying. And it just goes to show that you're not alone. And there's a lot of people in that boat. And there's not a magic formula for it, I think. It is that developing the comfort and building the muscles over time. So even if it's giving a lunch and learn presentation at your company, if it's joining a Twitter space and discussing some technical content, or if it's streaming on Twitch and talking to two viewers. You know, a lot of people start streaming on Twitch and it's very hard to get past the 5 viewer mark. Like it's very rare. Lots of early streamers, you sit at 0 to 5 viewers for quite a while, unless you have an audience from somewhere else. But I've seen people that do that and they get one person in chat and they're speaking publicly, they're
Really?
talking and they're
Mhm.
engaging with their audience. So I think whatever small methods of practice you can find are really impactful if you do them and you just do that consistently. And that's why I always encourage people. Doesn't matter if it feels small, doesn't matter if there's a tiny audience. It's all about developing that confidence over time. And you just do that by putting in reps.
You know, the best part about your that video Your presentation in that conference is you started with a chunk and you settled in, and then you added another chunk, you settled in, and then another chunk. You covered a lot, but it did not feel like a lot. Toward the end, I was feeling like, oh my God, you have shared a lot, but did not feel like overwhelming.
Hmm.
So that was a feedback if you want.
Thank
Right.
you. I do appreciate that. And yeah, it was tough to think about how to organize it because I was really trying to combine the last 5 years of kind of experiences and different forms of this that I'd seen
Mm.
throughout industry. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
We are at 5:55. I don't know how much buffer time you have.
I could go a few minutes over. I don't have a hard stop, so I could go 5 or 10 over.
Okay. Two question. Why Nate is looking for a job now? And how does it feel to apply the same type of tactics and a strategy that you have been sharing to other people, your mentees, for this job search?
Sorry, what was the first question? What was the first
Why
part?
you decided to go back to a 9 to 5?
So the why is very simple. So that I didn't obliterate all of my savings, I set revenue targets. And so I had a
Mhm.
revenue target to hit by the end of February with my independent business, and I didn't make that goal. And so it's part of that risk tolerance I was talking about with having a
Got it.
family. I'm not poor. We're able to pay our bills and everything, but we had this chunk of money set aside, and I didn't want to get to the point where I was actually like dipping into savings or having to, take a tax hit trying to liquidate retirement funds or anything like that. So I set a goal on the revenue to make sure that I would become sustainable before anything got to that point. So that was literally, I set a goal, I didn't hit it. And my point was, I'm going to go back to full time job search to make sure that I'm sustainable. And it's going to be a different kind of journey. I don't like to think of it as a failure, although I often do in many ways, but it was good to set that for making sure that I stay in a good place with our finances and that our family is secure. So that was the main thing. The cool part is it has been encouraging in that, and I do this a lot with stuff where it feels cheesy to present certain things when I need to hear it myself, right? Even my confidence talk, like the day before I gave the confidence talk, I was getting all kinds of second guesses where I was like, I shouldn't be talking on a stage. I'm not very confident. What the heck am I doing with my life? But I think it's relevant to just the human experience. And there's a lot
Mhm.
of problems that I think it's important people understand. There are some problems we feel like are a low level problem or a beginner problem. And there are so many problems that all humans experience. And it doesn't matter if you're extremely experienced or if you're brand new in the industry. I think there's a lot more shared experience and understanding of things. And so, talking with my mentees, talking them through interview processes, reassuring them when there's rejections, all of that is just in the top of my mind as I'm going through the same experiences. And I think it speaks to how similar so many life experiences are, even if you're at different stages of your career or different phases of life and different seasons. But a lot of it is just generally good advice is always good advice. I'm doing a lot of interviews and sending out a lot of applications. One thing I tell my mentees is, especially in today's job market, it's not an easy job market in tech. There's a lot of difficult factors. So you don't set your sights on landing one job or on a specific job, but you set your goal on how many applications am I going to send out each week and how many rejections can I get to? And even setting rejections as a metric where I'm like, hey, I want to get rejected 20 times to know that I'm working hard. When you set your goals on things like that, one,
Right.
it gives you a bit of a positive metric. So if you get a rejection, you're like, hey, that's one of 20. I just got to go a little further and I got to get 19 more of those. And it makes your goals more in your control as well.
Right.
And you cannot guarantee that you're going to get a certain number of interviews or that you're going to get certain companies. Like you're just not in control of that. And there's so many factors that oftentimes don't even have to do with you, right? Some positions you could get a rejection. It's not that you were a bad candidate, it's that they had an amazing candidate, right? So many of these, I've been on the other end of the
Or they
say that
have
again?
different kind of fit. They were looking for a different kind of
Right.
fit. Even though
They're
you were
looking
the
for a
best.
different skill set, they're looking for a different background. Whatever it is, it's not always a reflection on you, and I even go further to say most of the time it's not a negative reflection on you. Even if you didn't measure up to somebody else, you shouldn't be thinking about yourself in those terms. You should be thinking about yourself as an individual and how far you have grown.
Mm.
There's a great quote that Prime has talked about a lot where comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that's really true, where we can't always be comparing ourselves to other people. We should be comparing ourselves to ourselves from the past. And as long as you're growing, and that's the growth that you should pursue. And yeah, if there's somebody else that was more qualified or a better fit for this role, that's not something you should beat yourself up about. That's not a failure for
Right.
you. And even more, it's a victory because you've got one more rejection in the books and you're grinding towards that 20 or something. A lot of those perspectives have helped me to remind myself, and I feel guilty too, as somebody trying to teach it. When I have those same struggles or thoughts, I can feel a little guilty at first of, oh man, I'm preaching this. I should understand it. I shouldn't feel this discouragement or whatever it is. And it's not true. I think there's so much advice that helps everyone. And it's helpful for me to have those things top of mind because I've talked to a lot of people about it. It's easy to turn around and preach it to myself, and I need it a lot of the time.
And Nate, real quick, how was you finding your projects, like consultation project during that 6 month?
Mainly network. So I found those through people I was connected to, past employers, people that I've connected to through Twitter. I think it's been one of the coolest things, even in this current job search. So I put out a
Mhm.
tweet saying that I'm open to full time
Right.
applications. And I had so many friends, so many people send me DMs, leave comments, retweet it. That tweet got like 100 retweets, which was so humbling. I don't go viral on Twitter. I'm not the biggest person on Twitter in terms of engagement and views and things going by. Like, that's just not really what I do with the platform or how I'm not witty enough or smart enough, whatever you want to say. And so to see that much engagement and that much support from the community was incredible. And I've gotten referrals, I've gotten people sending me job postings like, hey, I think you would be good for this. Um, so even in the consulting work, there was a lot of that it came from the community I've invested in. And it's been, gosh, maybe close to 3 years now. Cause again, I got way more involved online during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And I didn't often think of what I was doing as networking, right? I wasn't looking for another job. I wasn't looking for clients. I was just connecting with people online and building relationships. And even yourself. I remember seeing you. I think I followed you when you were under 200 followers on Twitter. And I
Yeah.
remember going to your profile and being like, oh, wow, like this guy doesn't have a lot of followers, but he puts out really thoughtful posts. Like it was clear you were trying to make very relevant educational posts. You were trying to bring value. And that was why I followed you. I was just like, this effort pays off. The amount of effort and intentionality that Vinod is putting into his Twitter and his profile and just what he's putting out into the world, that's something that excites me. I see very small accounts. When you see that kind of work and intentionality, and now where are you at? You blew past thousands and thousands of followers very quickly, but I think that's so valuable, and it's now I get to speak on a podcast and share some life experience with you and your audience. But I think that's just another example of like how much you can develop real relationships through online communities, platforms, social media, whatever it is. If you show up and you're genuine and authentic and you want to connect with people, there are many people I met primarily online that I would consider close friends. Some that I've met in real life over time, some that I never met in real life, but still have very real relationships that has resulted in business engagements, has resulted in referrals, has resulted in them recommending me to other people. And I think that's the core of networking. And I know you have talked about this on Twitter Space and a couple others as well, but when you re-lens networking and look at it as building and developing relationships over time, I think that there's so much value in that. And yeah, for me, a lot of them didn't pay off until years later, but it never bothered me because I didn't
Right.
have it. That wasn't the first goal. It wasn't that I was trying to land a job at that moment. I was just trying to meet more people.
Yep. And I still have friends that I met in my first company, and then second and third. We had a Zoom call with the friends in the second company just 2 weeks ago. And that was like 22 years after.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So a network, friendship, relationship doesn't have to be like mechanical. It's something that you do on a day-to-day life, and that's what you could do online as well.
absolutely. And the long time frame too, I think it's another thing I spoke earlier about. Careers are long. And I
Right.
think that's another thing that people don't realize is, and a lot of my positions came from people I had worked at in the past. And that's super common, but it's another reason you don't burn bridges, right? And I think that's a big thing is you don't discount people that you worked with in the past. Even if you have difficulties working with individuals, understand everybody's human and everybody's got differences. If you didn't work well with somebody at one stage of your life, that doesn't make them inherently bad. And they may be an amazing person to work with later in life too. So I always tell people, you don't want to burn any bridges. You want to, even if you're leaving a company, even if you had a really bad experience for whatever reason, you probably talked to and worked with a lot of great people. And so hold on to those connections, maintain those relationships, because again, a career is a very long time and you have no idea where other individuals are going to go either. A lot of those people won't be at that same company for their whole career. And it's incredible how much the fact that you connected with somebody and you worked well with them and they liked you can just come back around later in life. And I've seen that so many times. I just
For sure.
had a friend from college recommend me on LinkedIn. I got a message out of the blue from some guy hiring. He was just like, "Hey, this guy recommended you." I was like, "I literally have not talked to him in 20 years. Like, how did he even remember me?" But
Right.
he did.
He
And he
did.
saw my post on LinkedIn and he was just like, "Hey, this is great. I'm going to send this along to a hiring manager." So I think that's something in that long-term perspective that's important people remember is just you might not love the company you're working at right now, but understand how amazing all the
Yeah.
people that you work with are and how much opportunity there is in those relationships.
100%. 100%. Okay. All right. So as we are getting to the end, last two questions, and I change it a bit. You do a lot of mentorship coaching. So if somebody have to connect with you and want to get your mentorship, how do they approach you?
The best way to get a hold of me is probably on Twitter at Nate Emerson on Twitter. And I respond a lot there. My DMs are open. So definitely reach out there. I have my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Nate underscore codes. And so I've been streaming there weekly, and anybody's welcome if you like watching software developers. We talk about software dev stuff. Sometimes we just have conversations about the industry. And then on from Twitch, you can find I've got a Discord as well. I don't know the link off the top of my head. I got a Discord with some individuals and building up that community. Yeah, but Twitter's probably the easiest. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So if you find me there, anywhere you can send a direct message, I'll probably respond. I'm not all that popular, so I don't get flooded that bad. And I'm usually able to stay on top of my DMs.
All right. With that, what is your message to the audience?
Do something. Whatever it is, whatever your goal, whatever your approach, wherever you are in your journey, focus on doing something. You're not going to do things perfect. We never do. Sometimes you don't even do it well, but the important thing is that you're doing something. And this is inspired by Jason Langsdorf, actually, who puts out a lot of amazing content. He recently, man, I saw a couple people talking about it. I forget exactly what it was, but they had a catchphrase around it where it's just do something or do something epic or something along those lines. But it is so true. It is just you there's so many reasons and there's so many excuses we can come up with. There's so many fears that will hold us back from doing things. Jason's bit was hashtag do it anyways. So I guess I'm contributing to that a little bit because that's been an inspiration is do it anyways. There's a bunch of reasons you can come up with for why something's not good or why you're not good enough for something, but just do it anyways because you learn and benefit so much through the journey that the biggest, including for myself, I need to hear this all the time. I need to record more videos. I need to just put myself out there more. And there are so many people where the biggest regrets that I see don't often come from doing something poorly or doing something imperfectly. They come from not doing something. And so that's the thing, as long as you're doing something, there's so much benefit you can get from that. There's learnings that can happen. There's opportunity surface area. If you're building in public, if you're posting online, others might see that, others might discover it. But by just doing something and putting your all into it, even if it doesn't hit whatever the like amazing end result is of thousands of followers or exploding on some social media platform or whatever it is, don't set your sights on the goal, set your sights on the steps. And then you can consider each step a victory. And I think that's a really important perspective to maintain is as long as you took a step, it's not going to be a failure because you took that step.
Thank you so much, Nate, for this podcast, being my guest. It was fun episode. I learned a lot about you and everything that you have done. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me.